We're talking about the subject of ACL injuries in becoming, well, a real crisis in women's football, it has to be said. We've seen stars like Beth Mead, Alexia Patella spend months out of the game, Leah Williamson as well. The toll isn't just physical, as we can expect, it's mental as well. Experts say factors like fixture congestion, limited recovery time, and even hormonal differences could all play a part. The message is clear. If the women's game is to keep on growing, investment in proper medical support and injury prevention has to be a top priority. Now, as we've just been speaking about, Michelle Agyemang, the Lioness forward, is the latest, unfortunately, player to suffer an ACL injury, as she did so on international duty with England, having to be taken off on a stretcher in the Australia game. And we only just learnt that it is an ACL injury that she has picked up. Joining us to discuss more on this and perhaps what research has been done and what more needs to be done too, it's our very own Max Scott, who's actually done research into ACL injuries and how prevalent they are in the women's game. And I know you've actually have sort of followed the boot side of things. So just tell us a little bit about the research into women's boots, for example.
Well, funnily enough, this is an investigation I did back in 2024. And as is ever the case, it takes some sort of high profile injury for this to sort of become back or return to the sort of consciousness of the media with Michelle Agyemang. But essentially what I noticed was this sort of terrible trend of ACL injuries being so much more prominent in women footballers than in men. In fact, women footballers are currently 8 times more likely to get an ACL injury than a man.
I read that, couldn't believe it.
And ultimately, and it speaks to your point, Lianne, about research, we don't quite know why. And let's call a spade. We don't quite know why, because whilst commercially women's football is catching up with men's football, it's not there, it's not the same, we know that, but it's catching up. There's been a lot of sort of recent, particularly in the past couple of years, investment in women's football. But in terms of research, medical research, sports science, it hasn't, and it's nowhere near it. And of course, strides are always being made because brands feel a responsibility to do that. It's my opinion that brands are much more interested in making a lot of money. And so what I did find is that, major sports manufacturers have been marketing in the past women's football boots as women's football boots, when in fact and I was given this phrase by a fantastic woman called Laura Youngson, who set up Ida Sports, which is a brand which specifically creates football boots for women. But what she said is that you just make them pink. And that's what these global sports brands have been hiding behind, is providing women with men's football boots that traditionally, provide colours.
They've made them pretty.
Exactly.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Right.
And there is a pattern of this over the years. And of course, sports brands have sort of slowly started catching up. But for example, Adidas, until June, after our investigation, which was picked up by Serena Wiegman, it was picked up by all sorts of people in the game, until the summer, they hadn't made a boot exclusively for women, and since 2016 had made what they called gender-neutral boots, which, in my opinion, and the opinion of lots of people in the game, is just a male boot that's slightly thinner. And the reason, and strange enough, I'd become somewhat of like an amateur podiatrist in this investigation. And essentially, the physiology of men and women is obviously very different. Women have much narrower heels, higher arches in their feet generally, wider toe gap, hips set wider apart. And so the way that pressure runs through their legs is very different to men. And so that... And it speaks to your point just before the break, but there does need to be a lot more research. But research costs a lot of money, because these companies need time to be able to put the research in and figure out, well, hold on. And it's not that boots definitely cause ACL injuries, but that was my angle, is could this be a reason? And so off the back of the Michelle Agyemang news, you sort of realise that this is something that is unfortunately going to take time. But load management, as you've referenced, Lianne, is also a big issue, is because we don't know. And it's similar in the men's game, right? This is an issue in football in general. With an increasingly demanding fixture schedule, athletes play more football. And if you play more football, you're going to get injured more. And if in the previous season you played 50 games and then because of a Club World Cup and a decent FA Cup run and a decent European run, you play 80 games the next season, it is going to have an effect on you. And unfortunately, because the commercial interests of playing football are, God, they outweigh anything. What we're constantly doing in both the men and the women's game is trying to catch up. But naturally, because of the way that the world is, the women's game is behind the men's game in all of those areas in terms of research. And so I certainly am of the opinion that football boots play a massive part in this. I cannot say whether or not that's the case with Michelle Agyemang. But I guess this story is reminding ourselves of the reality that there is a huge disparity in the in the equipment that women are allowed to wear.
Yeah, I mean, I think because of all these injuries, we're looking for answers, right? And I love that you did this research because you did it. You went over there on your own back. You didn't. Then no one said to you, go over there, Max, and do this because you care about it. That's why I had you on my show last year to talk about it. But I think like the reason why I'm saying it's the load is because that's the only change that there's been. You know, I grew up wearing men's football boots. Like I said, David Beckham's boots. I wanted every boot he had. And I do think you only saw after the Euros, there wasn't even a Mary Earps jersey for sale.
That's right.
Like, they are playing catch up. And you're right. These companies will see where the money is and that's where they'll go. But I do think there has to be more focused on the women's boots as well. But then in correlation with other stuff. Does that make sense? Because we're all looking for answers. And you're right. I think you touched upon a really great point there, that now that this has become another high profile player, everyone's talking about it again. But is there a tendency you feel like it went away, but it never really went away because it's been 152?
And even just at grassroots level, I follow a Twitter account formerly known as X. I follow a Twitter account which tracks exclusively from grassroots level the amount of ACL injuries, and I have notifications from it. And every weekend there is a girl, a woman from grassroots levels that suffer ACL injuries. And so it's at a point now where the research, and I'm not going to say limited research, because there are, I went over to Puma, for example, and they are doing really incredible research, and they partner with universities and female athletes at universities for all sorts of purposes. So I'm not going to sort of completely criticise the industry, but it's just a sort of cold, hard fact and truth that women suffer ACL injuries far more than men, right? And so, and it's multifaceted. There's so many different aspects, and I do think that load management is massive. And because the schedule is increased, again, I don't want to be sued, but because the load management is so much more nowadays, I think that you have to look at that and you have to explore that. And I totally get, Lianne, like your passion listening to you speak about it, but there has to be research.
Yeah, but can I ask you a thing though, Max? Right, so when do we think this research will come into fruition? Because I'm thinking 5 to 10 years. Like, when are we going to start seeing? Because I agree with you. I'd go around to every club. They're measuring the boot. They're measuring the foot. They're doing good stuff. But what are we going to do? Keep seeing every single week there being another player tear their ACL meniscus, and then we're just going to say, okay, the research. They're doing research. When are we going to see these things be kind of measured? Yeah,
it's a really good question, and I think sadly the answer is yes, it is going to take that time for the science to be able to catch up with the demand and say this is what we think it is. But it doesn't detract from the fact that talking about it more regularly, not just when Michelle Agyemang, a Lioness star, tears her ACL, I think that people listen. People listen to you. People listen to talkSPORT. People listen to all of these broadcasters. And if it's spoken about, then people will start doing it. People will start sort of taking action. It reminds me of Rodri, who, in a very sad and ironic way, was in the build-up to the Club World Cup, was talking about his concerns about load management. And he did his ACL before the Club World Cup. And then at the end of the Club World Cup, in their final game when they were knocked out, he got another injury and wasn't back, until a few games into the season. And so there is a growing concern, and I know this from speaking to players about the amount of football that they're playing, but they're all tied up in commercial contracts. They're all professional football's part of clubs that have to play in certain competitions. And so I do think it does take journalists, presenters, pundits, ex-pros to talk about it, to make it an issue. Because I personally think, sorry, I know I keep going on, but I think that it detracts from the product. Because if your players are knackered or injured and can't play, less people are going to watch it. Less people are going to be
the best
interested.
playing. Yeah, absolutely. Should say, back in 2020, the Football Association launched an audit and formed an advisory group to study why anterior cruciate ligament injuries are more prevalent in female footballers. They did say it would be carefully assessed over time. Don't think I've seen anything about that since 2020. And also FIFPro, in conjunction with PFA England, Nike and Leeds Beckett University, have been piloting a scheme, which is over a 3-year period. It began, I think, last year, about exploring the impacts of ACL injuries and why they are prevalent in the women's game too. So studies, researches are taking place. It's just, as you've both already said, it's just going to take time for those results to come through, unfortunately. But Max, it's been really informative. Thank you.
Yeah,